My name is Evelyn Hart. The house was sold before the flowers on my father's grave had begun to fade. That is the part people usually react to, not the funeral, not the grief, not even the fact that my brothers and I had barely spoken through most of it. It was the speed, the way a lifetime disappeared inside a signature, the way 48 years of family history became paperwork, the way my father's house stopped belonging to us before any of us had fully understood he was gone. The call came on a gray Thursday afternoon. I was standing in the laundry room of my apartment, folding one of Dad's sweaters. I had no reason to be folding it. The sweater didn't belong in my apartment. It smelled faintly of cedar, old coffee, and the aftershave he had used for nearly 30 years. I suppose grief makes people do strange things. Sometimes you cry. Sometimes you stare at walls. Sometimes you spend 20 minutes folding a dead man's sweater because putting it away feels too permanent. My phone rang. Graham, my older brother. I almost ignored it. Not because I was angry, because I was tired. The kind of tired grief creates. A tiredness that sleep doesn't touch. A tiredness that lives somewhere deeper than the body. Eventually I answered. His voice sounded efficient. That should have warned me. Evelyn, I wanted you to hear it from me. My stomach tightened immediately. Whenever someone begins a sentence that way, something has already happened. The decision has already been made. The train has already left the station. You're simply being informed. What happened? A pause. Then, the house sold this morning. I stared at the sweater in my hands. The room suddenly felt smaller. Dad's house. Even as I asked it, I knew how ridiculous it sounded. Of course, Dad's house. There was only one house. The house. The one with the white porch swing. The one where Mom planted roses every spring. The one where Christmas lights stayed up until February because Dad refused to climb ladders in January. The one where every version of our family still existed somewhere inside the walls. Yes. I sat down slowly. You sold it. The offer was excellent. Not yes. Not exactly. The offer was excellent. That was Graham. He could transform almost any emotional event into a financial report. Sometimes I admired that about him. Most of the time I didn't. The funeral was 4 days ago. I know, you already listed it. It happened quickly. Quickly. There was that word. The word people use when they don't want to discuss the decisions hiding behind it. Nothing important ever actually happens quickly. It only looks that way from the outside. I closed my eyes. Across the room, Dad's sweater rested in my lap. For one strange second, I imagined him laughing. Not because any of this was funny. Because he always laughed when Graham tried to solve emotional problems with practical solutions. He would have hated this. The words escaped before I could stop them. Silence. Then Graham sighed. A long, exhausted sigh. Evie. Only my family called me that. Everyone else used Evelyn. Dad had called me Evie right up until the day he died. Now hearing it from Graham felt wrong. Like someone borrowing a voice that didn't belong to them. He isn't here anymore. The sentence landed harder than he intended. Not cruel, not even unkind, just incomplete. People often confuse incomplete truths with complete ones. Dad wasn't here anymore. That part was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. Not even close. I looked toward the apartment window. Rain slid slowly down the glass. The sky looked exactly the way grief feels. Heavy, quiet, waiting. When does the buyer take possession? 30 days. 30 days. 30 days before strangers walked through my childhood. 30 days before someone painted over memories. 30 days before the house became a place where no one remembered our names. I swallowed. What about the last room? The silence that followed was immediate. Different. Noticeable. Important. Every family has certain subjects that change the air. The last room was ours. At the end of the upstairs hallway sat a door that had remained locked for most of my life. Not hidden, not secret, just closed. Always closed. When we were children, we invented stories about it. Treasure room, military records, government secrets, gold bars, a ghost. Peter once became convinced Dad was secretly protecting evidence that would prove he worked for the CIA. Dad laughed so hard he nearly choked on his coffee. But he never opened the door. Not for us. Not ever. What about it? Graham asked. I heard the caution immediately. You opened it before selling. Not a question. A statement. A reasonable assumption. The house was sold. Obviously, they had opened every room. Obviously. Another silence. Longer this time. Then no. My grip tightened around the sweater. What do you mean no? We never opened it. I sat completely still. For a moment, I genuinely wondered if I had misunderstood him. The way people sometimes misunderstand shocking things, because understanding them immediately would hurt too much. You sold Dad's house. Yes. You sold every room. Yes. You sold the property. Yes. And nobody opened the last room. No. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because the alternative was screaming. The laugh startled even me. It sounded unfamiliar. Sharp. Almost broken. You've got to be kidding. Evie, no. I stood. The sweater fell onto the floor. No. Explain this to me. It doesn't matter what's inside. The moment he said it, I knew he didn't believe it. Because people don't defend things that aggressively unless they are trying to convince themselves to. I walked toward the window. Rain continued sliding down the glass. Slow, steady, patient, just like time, just like grief, just like truth. Eventually all of them arrive. It mattered to Dad. Maybe, I turned, even though he couldn't see me. Maybe, another sigh. Then his voice softened. For the first time since the conversation began, he sounded less like a businessman and more like my brother. I didn't want to deal with it. There it was. Not practicality. Not efficiency. Truth. Small. Uncomfortable. Human. I leaned against the wall. For years people had called Graham the strong one. The responsible one. The successful one. What they never understood was that strength often disguises fear. Sometimes the strongest people in a family are simply the people who learn to avoid their pain most effectively. What are you afraid of? His answer came, too. Quickly. Nothing. Which of course meant everything. And for the first time since Dad died, I became certain of something. The last room wasn't holding my father's secret. It was holding my family's. I drove to the house the next morning. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn. The roads were still wet. Puddles reflected the pale gray sky. Everything looked washed clean. That annoyed me. Grief should not happen on beautiful mornings. The world should at least have the decency to look sad. Instead, sunlight broke through the clouds just as I turned on a Willow Creek road. The house appeared at the end of the street, exactly where it had always been. White siding, green shutters, the old maple tree near the driveway. The porch swing Dad rebuilt twice because Mom refused to replace it. For one impossible second, my heart forgot. For one impossible second, I expected to see him. Maybe carrying groceries. Maybe trimming hedges. Maybe waving from the front porch. That is the cruel thing about loss. Your mind learns the truth long before your heart does. The house looked normal. My life was not. A bright red sold sign stood in the front yard. I hated it immediately. Not because the house had sold, because the sign looked proud of itself. I parked and sat in the car for several minutes. The front door remained closed. The curtains moved slightly in the breeze. Nothing dramatic happened. No music, no revelation, just silence. Real grief usually arrives that way. Quietly, without permission. My phone buzzed. Peter. I answered. Where are you? Outside. Already. You sound surprised. I thought you'd wait for Graham. I looked at the sold sign again. No. Peter hesitated, then lowered his voice. I had a dream about Dad. That didn't surprise me. Everyone in my family dreamed about him after he died. The strange part was how different the dreams were. Peter dreamed Dad was still alive. Graham dreamed Dad was disappointed in him. I dreamed Dad was trying to tell me something. Always something. Never what. What happened? I asked. Peter was quiet for a moment. He kept pointing upstairs. A chill moved through me. Upstairs. Yeah. The last room. I don't. No. His voice softened. But that's what it felt like. Neither of us spoke. Because sometimes coincidence feels suspicious. Especially after a funeral. Especially after a death. Especially when a locked room has lived inside your imagination for 30 years. I'll be there in 20 minutes, Peter said. Okay. And Evie. Yeah. If Dad wanted us to see something, his voice drifted away. I finished the sentence for him. We'll find it. The line went quiet. Then he said something I would think about later. Something simple. Something true. I hope whatever it is makes sense. I stared at the house. The porch. The windows. The upstairs hallway hidden somewhere beyond them. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I whispered, I don't think that's the point. By the time Peter arrived, I was sitting on the front steps. The key to the house rested in my hand. Dad's key. The last one. The final copy. The one the realtor forgot to collect. Peter climbed out of his truck, carrying coffee. 3 cups. Not 2. I noticed immediately. So we're pretending Graham is coming. Peter handed me a cup. We both know he is. I smiled despite myself. That was the thing about Peter. He understood people emotionally even when he struggled to stand up to them. He always knew who would show up, even when they didn't know yet. 20 minutes later, a black Mercedes turned into the driveway. Neither of us looked surprised. Graham stepped out. Expensive coat. Expensive shoes. The same controlled expression he wore at funerals, business meetings, and family arguments. Armor disguised as composure. He walked toward us. Nobody said hello. Nobody needed to. Families don't always communicate through words. Sometimes they communicate through arrival. The 3 of us stood in front of the house. Together. For the first time since the funeral. For the first time in years, maybe. Graham looked up at the second floor. His eyes stopped briefly on the hallway window. Then he looked away. Too quickly. I saw it. Fear. Again. The same fear from yesterday. Not of the room itself. Of what lived inside it. You really want to do this? He asked. I held up the key. I really do. Peter looked. Between us. Then toward the house. Then back toward us. I hate to say this. Then don't, Graham replied. Peter ignored him. But maybe Dad knew this would happen. Neither of us answered. Because secretly, both of us had been thinking exactly the same thing. Dad knew people. Better than anyone. Better than we knew ourselves. If he left a locked room behind, there was a reason. If he never opened it, there was a reason. If he died without explaining it, there was definitely a reason. The question wasn't whether our father had planned this. The question was how much. I unlocked the front door. The hinges groaned softly. The familiar smell greeted us immediately. Coffee. Wood. Books. Home. My chest tightened. Behind me, Peter stopped moving. I turned. His eyes were wet. Pete. He laughed once. Embarrassed. I forgot what it smelled like. Nobody made fun of him. Because all 3 of us understood. Smells are dangerous. They bypass logic. They bypass time. One breath can transport you 20 years backward. One breath can resurrect a person. The house was empty now. Most furniture had already been tagged for donation. Boxes sat against walls. The living room echoed. It somehow Dad felt everywhere. In the scratches on the floor. In the worn armrest of his favorite chair. In a faded mark on the kitchen wall where he measured our height every birthday. The house looked abandoned. The memories didn't. We moved quietly through the rooms. Kitchen. Dining room. Living room. Everything felt smaller than I remembered. Childhood homes always do. Children measure houses differently. They measure them with imagination. Adults measure them with square footage. The difference matters. Eventually we reached the staircase. No one said anything. We simply started climbing. One step, then another, then another. The hallway appeared. Exactly the same. Family photographs lined both walls. Graduations. Birthdays. Christmas mornings. Summer vacations. Versions of ourselves frozen in time. At the far end stood the door. The last room. Dark wood. Brass handle. Closed. Waiting. For a strange moment, nobody moved. Not because the distance was far. Because after 30 years of mystery, 10 more seconds suddenly felt precious. Then Graham spoke. So quietly I almost missed it. I haven't stood here in 22 years. Peter looked at him. I looked at him. And for the first time, my oldest brother seemed smaller than the hallway itself. Not weak. Human. What happened 22 years ago? I asked. Graham stared at the door. A long silence passed. Then he answered. I opened it. And everything changed. Peter blinked. You opened it? The question sounded ridiculous. Of course he opened it. He had just said so. But some truths arrived too unexpectedly for the mind to accept immediately. Graham nodded. His eyes never left the door. I was 25. The hallway seemed quieter than before. The entire house felt like it was listening. You never told us, I said. No. Why? A sad smile appeared on his face. The kind that comes from understanding your younger self and not particularly liking him. Because I spent the next 22 years pretending it never happened. Peter stared at him. What was inside? Graham's expression changed. Not fear. Not exactly. Something more complicated. Regret. Not what I expected. The answer only made the mystery worse. I looked at the brass handle. The same handle that had occupied so much of my imagination growing up. A locked door becomes larger over time. It grows inside your mind. Eventually, it becomes less about the room and more about the questions attached to it. What did you see? I asked. Graham swallowed, then surprised us. I don't remember. Peter frowned immediately. What? I don't remember. That's impossible. It shouldn't be. His voice remained calm. Too calm. I remember entering. A pause. I remember Dad being there. Another. I remember leaving. He looked genuinely frustrated. The rest feels blurred. I studied him. For the first time, I believed him. Memory doesn't erase every painful event. Sometimes it erases the meaning, especially when we aren't ready to carry it. You've forgotten? I think I chose to. The honesty startled all of us. Peter shook his head slowly. Dad knew. What? Dad knew you forgot. Graham laughed softly, a humorless laugh. Apparently. We stood there together. 3 adults. 3 children. 3 versions of grief occupying the same hallway. The last room waited. Patient. Silent. As if it understood that every secret eventually becomes tired of hiding. I looked at the key in my hand. Old iron. Worn smooth from decades of use. The key suddenly felt heavier. Not physically. Emotionally. As though it carried the weight of everything we hadn't said to one another. Everything we hadn't asked. Everything we had avoided. Open it, Peter whispered. Nobody moved. Then Peter laughed nervously. I can't believe I'm saying that. Neither could I. The last room had been part of our family mythology for so long that opening it felt almost wrong. Like turning to the final page of a book you've loved for years. Once you know, you can't unknow. Graham stepped aside. The movement surprised me. What are you doing? His eyes remained on the door. It shouldn't be me. The answer arrived immediately. Without thought. Without defense. Without performance. Just truth. And suddenly I understood something. Whatever happened 22 years ago still hurt. More than he admitted. More than he understood. Maybe even more than he remembered. I stepped forward. The hallway floor creaked beneath my feet. The sound echoed softly through the house. The key slid into the lock. Perfect fit. Of course. For a moment, nobody breathed. Then I turned it. A click. Small. Ordinary. Life-changing. The lock released. For 30 years, that sound had remained trapped inside metal. Now belonged to us. I wrapped my fingers around the brass handle. Cold. Smooth. Familiar. The house seemed to hold its breath. So did we. Slowly, I pushed the door inward. Sunlight entered first. Then silence. Then revelation. The room beyond was nothing like I expected. No boxes. No antiques. No hidden fortune. No forgotten inheritance. The space looked more like a library. Or an archive. Or a life carefully preserved. Floor-to-ceiling shelves covered every wall. Thousands of photographs. Hundreds of journals. Audio tapes. Letters. Scrapbooks. Videos. Carefully labeled containers. Everything organized. Everything protected. Everything loved. Peter stepped into the doorway. Oh my God. The words escaped him before he realized he had spoken. I understood, because I felt exactly the same way. The room wasn't filled with possessions. It was filled with memories. Not random memories. Specific ones. Intentional ones. On the nearest shelf sat a photograph of Peter at age 8 holding a fishing rod nearly twice his size. Beside it rested a handwritten note. Another photograph showed me sitting beside Mom in the garden. Another showed Graham asleep in a chair after studying late into the night. The ordinary moments. The invisible moments. The moments nobody usually saves. Except Dad had. Every single one. I walked forward slowly. The room smelled faintly of cedar wood and old paper. Not neglect. Care. Years of care. Decades of care. Then I noticed something. A photograph. Mom, standing beside the kitchen window, smiling. The sunlight caught her hair exactly the way I remembered. The sight hit me so suddenly that I had to sit down. Not because I was overwhelmed, because for one impossible second, she felt close enough to touch. Peter knelt beside another shelf. His hands trembled. Dad kept all of this? I nodded silently, because I couldn't speak. My throat had closed completely. Across the room, Graham hadn't moved. He stood just inside the doorway, staring at a section near the back wall. Frozen, like someone looking directly at a ghost. I followed his gaze. There, resting on a shelf by itself, sat a small wooden box. Simple, unremarkable, except for the name engraved across the front. Graham. Only Graham. Nothing else. My brother's face drained of color. Peter noticed too. What is that? Graham didn't answer. His eyes remained fixed on the box, as though he had seen it before, as though some forgotten corner of his memory had suddenly awakened. Slowly, he stepped forward. One step, then another. The room seemed to shrink around him. Every shelf, every photograph, every journal. Watching, waiting, remembering. At last he reached the box. His hand hovered above it, shaking, and in a voice barely louder than a whisper, he said, I remember now. The room fell silent, because whatever Graham had forgotten for 22 years was finally coming back, and none of us were prepared for what came next. I remember now. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted, because the expression on Graham's face told us this wasn't simply a memory returning. It was a wound reopening, a wound that had never healed properly because it had never been understood. His fingers touched the wooden box. For a moment, he closed his eyes. The room remained silent, except for the faint ticking of a clock somewhere downstairs. A sound from another lifetime, another version of our family. When I was 25, Graham said quietly, I thought Dad was disappointed in me. Peter frowned. What? Graham laughed softly. A painful laugh. Sounds ridiculous now. No, I said, because it didn't. Not at all. Every child eventually asks the same question. Some ask it at 5. Some ask it at 50. Was I enough? Did they approve of me? Do they really see me? The questions change shape. The ache remains the same. Graham stared at the box. When I got promoted, everyone congratulated me. His voice became distant. The voice of someone speaking from inside an old memory. My company gave me a bonus. A pause. My friends threw a party. Another. The local paper even did an interview. Peter smiled faintly. I remember that. Graham nodded. Everyone was proud. Then his expression changed. Everyone except Dad. The room became still, because none of us remembered that. Not once. Not ever. What do you mean? I asked. Graham looked down. I came home expecting him to be excited. A bitter smile appeared. Instead, he asked whether I was happy. The sentence sounded harmless. Yet something about it hurt him. Even now, I told him happiness wasn't the point. Peter lowered his eyes. He already knew where this was going. So did I. Because Graham had spent most of his life chasing achievement. Promotion after promotion. Award after award. Success after success. Always moving. Always climbing. Always proving. As if there were some invisible finish line where peace finally waited. Dad had never understood that. And Graham had never understood why. I told him success mattered. His voice softened. He asked me what I was sacrificing for it. The room fell silent. Even decades later, the question carried weight. Not because it was clever, because it was honest. What did you say? Peter asked. Graham smiled sadly. I got angry. That sounded familiar. Pain often disguises itself as anger when we are young, especially when someone touches a truth we don't want examined. I told him he didn't understand ambition. His eyes moved across the shelves, across the photographs, across the life our father quietly built. I told him he spent his life in the same town. A pause. I told him he never became anything. The words landed heavily, not because they were cruel, because they were spoken by a son who didn't yet understand what success was. Peter looked devastated. I felt my chest tighten. Not at Graham. For him. Because sometimes our deepest regrets are not the worst things we said. They're the things we said before we became wise enough to understand their cost. What happened? I asked. Graham's eyes filled with tears. For a long moment, he couldn't answer. Then he looked around the room, at the evidence surrounding us. Thousands of memories, thousands of acts of love, thousands of moments carefully preserved. And finally he whispered, "Dad opened this room." A chill moved through me. He brought me here. The room suddenly felt different. Not a secret room. A lesson. A message. A gift. He showed me the photographs. Graham's voice trembled. He showed me the journals. Another pause. He showed me the recordings. The silence deepened. Then Graham looked directly at me. I thought he was proving me wrong. His eyes drifted toward the wooden box. But he wasn't. His voice cracked. He was trying to show me what mattered. Peter sat heavily in a nearby chair. Nobody spoke, because we all understood. Too late. The way children often understand their parents. Years after the lesson was first offered, he told me something. Graham's hands trembled. A sentence. The room seemed to lean closer. Waiting. Listening. Remembering. What did he say? I asked. Tears slid slowly down my brother's face. And when he answered, his voice sounded like a little boy. Not the successful executive. Not the responsible oldest son. Just a son. He said. Graham swallowed, then whispered, "When you reach the top of whatever mountain you're climbing, make sure there's someone you still love waiting there." The word struck all three of us at once. Not dramatically. Quietly. Deeply. Like truth often does. Graham laughed through tears. I told him he didn't understand. A pause. He smiled. Another. Then he gave me this box. The room remained silent. Because suddenly we knew. The box wasn't an inheritance. It wasn't money. It wasn't property. It was unfinished love. Unfinished understanding. A conversation delayed for 22 years. Slowly, Graham opened it. Inside rested a stack of letters. Hundreds of pages. Carefully tied together with blue ribbon. The first envelope sat on top. A single line written across the front. For the day you finally remember. And in that moment, every mystery surrounding the last room became even bigger than before. For several seconds, none of us touched the letter. The room seemed to understand its importance before we did. For the day you finally remember. The words rested quietly on the envelope. Patient. Certain. As though Dad had never doubted this moment would come. Not if. When. Peter stared at it. Oh my God. I couldn't disagree. Because suddenly I realized something. My father hadn't hidden this room from us. He had protected it. There's a difference. A profound difference. Secrets hide. Protection waits. This room had been waiting. For understanding. For maturity. For timing. For us. Graham carefully lifted the envelope. His hands trembled. Not dramatically. Not enough for anyone else to notice. But I noticed. Because for most of my life, my brother's hands never shook. Not during presentations. Not during crises. Not during Mom's funeral. Not during Dad's funeral. Yet now, standing inside a room filled with evidence of love, he looked fragile. Human. The envelope opened softly. Paper against paper. A small sound. A life-changing sound. Inside rested a single letter. Only one page. Dad's handwriting. Neat. Steady. Familiar. Graham stared at it for several seconds before reading. Then his voice broke almost. Immediately. My son. Nothing more. Just those two words. Yet tears appeared in Graham's eyes. Because sometimes the words we need most are the simplest ones. My son. Not Graham. Not the successful one. Not the responsible one. Not the oldest. Not the achiever. My son. Belonging before accomplishment. Love before performance. Identity before success. Dad continued through the page. If you're reading this, then enough time has passed for life to teach you something I couldn't. The room became still. I watched Graham carefully. Each sentence seemed to land somewhere deep inside him. The place where old beliefs live. The place where children store the stories they tell themselves. The stories that become adults. I hope you've learned that achievement and worth are not the same thing. Graham stopped reading. His eyes closed. Only for a second. But it was enough. Because I knew that sentence hurt. Not because it was wrong. Because it was right. and because my brother had spent 47 years confusing the two. Peter sat quietly beside me. Neither of us spoke. This wasn't our lesson. It belonged to Graham. He continued, "When you were young, you thought I loved your report cards. I didn't. You thought I loved your trophies. I didn't. You thought I loved your promotions. I didn't." A tear rolled slowly down Graham's face. The room remained silent. Dad's handwriting continued. "I loved the little boy who carried his baby sister when she fell asleep on the couch." My breath caught. I remembered that so vividly. I had been 4, maybe 5. I fell asleep watching television. When I woke up, I was in bed. I never knew who carried me. Apparently now I did. I loved the teenager who stayed awake all night helping Peter finish a science project. Peter looked up immediately. His eyes widened. He remembered too. I loved the young man who worked 2 jobs after your mother became sick because he thought nobody noticed how expensive everything had become. Graham stopped. The letter lowered slowly. The room blurred through my tears. Because none of us knew that. Not Peter. Not me. Not even Dad had ever mentioned it. My brother stared at the page. Shocked. Almost confused. Like someone discovering evidence of a life he forgot he lived. Dad continued. "You spent years believing I admired your success. The truth is simpler. I admired your heart." The sentence seemed to settle over the entire room. Like sunlight. Like forgiveness. Like home. For several moments, nobody moved. Then something happened. Something small. Something enormous. Graham began crying. Not quietly. Not politely. Not the controlled tears people allow themselves at funerals. Real tears. The kind that come from old pain finally finding language. The kind that arrive when a burden becomes too heavy to carry alone. 22 years. 22 years of misunderstanding. 22 years of believing the wrong story. 22 years of trying to earn love that had already been given. Peter crossed the room first. Without hesitation. Without awkwardness. Without needing permission. He wrapped his arms around her brother. And Graham didn't pull away. I don't think he could have. A moment later, I joined them. The 3 of us stood there surrounded by journals, photographs, letters, recordings, and memories. 3 children disguised as adults. 3 grieving people discovering that love had been present all along. Outside, sunlight filtered through the window. Dust drifted lazily through the air. The room looked almost golden, as though memory itself had become visible. Eventually, Graham laughed through his tears. A broken laugh. Embarrassed. Relieved. Human. Dad was impossible. Peter smiled. Yeah, I smiled too. He really was. And for the first time since entering the room, something shifted. The mystery was still there. The room still held secrets. The shelves still held stories. But the fear was gone. Because the room wasn't judging us. The room loved us. Every photograph. Every journal. Every recording. Every letter. None of it existed to expose our failures. It existed to remind us who we were. And somewhere among those thousands of preserved memories, I suddenly understood the real inheritance Dad had left behind. Not the house, not the room, not even the letters. The inheritance was perspective. The inheritance was seeing ourselves through the eyes of someone who loved us completely, and that turned out to be worth more than anything hidden behind a locked door. Then Peter noticed something on the bottom shelf. A second wooden box, larger than Graham's, older. The name engraved on it made all 3 of us freeze. Margaret, our mother. The room fell silent. Because for the first time that day, we realized the last room wasn't only holding Dad's memories. It was holding hers too. Nobody spoke. The name alone was enough. Margaret, our mother. For a long moment, the 3 of us simply stared at the box. Because grief does something strange. You spend years thinking you've reached the deepest part of it. Then one ordinary moment proves there are still rooms inside your heart you haven't entered yet. Mom had been gone 27 years. 27. Long enough for Peter's children to know her only through photographs. Long enough for entire chapters of life to happen without her. Long enough for people to assume the grief had finished. But grief doesn't finish. It changes shape. That's all. Peter approached first. His expression looked almost frightened. not of the box, of hope. Hope can be terrifying after loss, especially when you've lived without it for a long time. Slowly he knelt beside it. His fingers traced our mother's name. The engraved letters were worn smooth. Dad must have touched them thousands of times. The realization hit me harder than expected. Every time he entered this room, every birthday, every anniversary, every lonely evening, every Christmas after she was gone, Dad had probably touched that name, the same way people touch wedding rings, or gravestones, or old photographs. Not because it changes anything, because love needs somewhere to go. Peter swallowed. Do we open it? His voice sounded younger than usual. Not childish, just vulnerable. I looked toward Graham. He nodded. Immediately, without hesitation. For the first time all day, none of us argued. Some decisions don't require discussion. They require courage. Peter lifted the lid. Inside sat dozens of cassette tapes, carefully organized, each one labeled in Dad's handwriting. Christmas 1987. Beach trip. Peter, age 6. Graham, graduation. Garden. Afternoon. Family dinner. The labels continued. Year after year. Memory after memory. Life after life. Then Peter froze. His hand stopped moving. I saw it immediately. One tape, different from the others. A white label. Only 3 words. Your mother's voice. The room disappeared. Not literally. Emotionally. Everything narrowed. The shelves. The sunlight. The photographs. Gone. Only that tape remained. For several seconds, nobody moved. Because some discoveries are too important to rush. Peter looked at me. Then Graham. Neither of us could speak. Eventually Graham found his voice. Barely. Play it. The old cassette player sat nearby. Dad had preserved it carefully. Ready. Waiting. As though he always knew this day would come. My hand shook while inserting the tape. The machine clicked. A brief hiss of static filled the room. Then silence. 1 second. 2. 3. And then laughter. Bright. Warm. Alive. My mother's laughter. Peter covered his mouth instantly. A broken sound escaped him. Half sob. Half gasp. I closed my eyes. Because hearing a voice after 27 years feels impossible. The human mind remembers faces surprisingly well. Voices fade. That was what terrified Dad. That was what started this room. That was what he had spent decades fighting against. And somehow, he had won. Mom's voice filled the room. Not a memory. Not an imagination. Her actual voice. Real. Present. Alive inside the speaker. Oh, stop it, Robert. Dad. She was talking to Dad. Somewhere in the background, our father laughed. Younger. Stronger. Healthier. The sound nearly destroyed me. For a moment, I wasn't 52 years old. I wasn't grieving. I wasn't standing inside a secret room. I was a little girl again. The world fell whole. The recording continued. Family conversation. Dishes clinking. Someone laughing. Peter as a child asking questions. Graham correcting him. Mom teasing both of them. Dad pretending to be annoyed. Ordinary life. The kind people rarely recognize as extraordinary until it's gone. Tears streamed down all 3 of our faces. Nobody tried to hide them. There was no point. The room had become sacred. Not religious. Human. The recording played for nearly 20 minutes. 20 minutes of a family that no longer existed. And yet somehow still did. At the very end, after everyone else stopped talking, one final conversation remained. Just Mom and Dad. The sound quality softened. The room around them quieter. More intimate. More private. Mom laughed gently. You save everything. Dad answered. I know. You don't have to. A pause. Then Dad's voice. Edo. Another pause. Longer this time. The kind couples share after decades together. The kind built from understanding. Then Mom asked, "What are you afraid of?" The room became still. Even now, even 27 years later, Dad's answer arrived softly. So softly we almost missed it. I'm afraid they'll forget how much they were loved. Peter broke completely. The sound tore through the room. Not loudly. Honestly, I felt tears sliding down my face. Unstoppable. Because suddenly everything made sense. The room. The journals. The photographs. The letters. The recordings. The decades of preservation. Not fear of forgetting. Not obsession. Love. Pure love. Dad had spent nearly 3 decades protecting one thing. The evidence. Evidence that we were loved. Evidence that Mom loved us. Evidence that he loved us. Evidence that ordinary moments matter. Evidence that family matters. Evidence that life matters. The tape clicked. Silence returned. Real silence. No static. No voices. No laughter. Only us. 3 siblings sitting inside a room built from devotion. And for the first time since Dad died, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt accompanied, as if both of my parents were somehow still participating in the conversation, still teaching, still guiding, still loving. Then Graham noticed something tucked beneath the cassette tapes. A sealed envelope, yellowed with age, addressed simply, "For my children." The room fell silent again, because somehow, impossibly, the last room still wasn't finished talking. The envelope looked older than everything else in the box. The paper had yellowed slightly with time. The corners were worn, not damaged, handled, loved. Across the front, in our mother's handwriting, were 3 simple words. "For my children." Nobody reached for it. Immediately, because after hearing her voice, after hearing Dad's voice, after discovering what this room truly was, we had become careful. Not cautious, reverent. The difference mattered. Some things deserved to be approached slowly. Peter finally whispered, "Mom wrote that." I nodded. Even before opening it, I knew. A person's handwriting survives the same way their laughter does. The body remembers. I carefully opened the envelope. Inside rested several pages, folded neatly, protected all these years. Waiting. The date at the top stopped me cold. 3 weeks before she died. The room seemed to tilt slightly. 27 years disappeared. 27 years became paper. 27 years became ink. 27 years became a mother speaking directly to her children. My hands trembled. Peter moved closer. Graham stood beside us. For once, nobody tried to act strong. For once, nobody pretended they weren't afraid. I began reading aloud. "My beautiful children, if you are reading this, then your father finally ignored my instructions and saved something I told him to throw away." A laugh escaped all 3 of us instantly, even through tears, even through grief. That was Mom, always able to make people smile in the middle of difficult things. The letter continued. "I hope he kept this. And if he did, I hope he kept it because he knew I was wrong. Sometimes the things we save become gifts." I paused. Already I could hear her voice. Not from the tape, from memory, the real memory, the living one. The letter continued. "Graham, if you are reading this, please stop trying so hard." My brother froze. Peter and I exchanged a look. Mom had always possessed an almost supernatural ability to identify exactly where someone hurt. You're going to spend much of your life believing you must earn your place in the world. You don't. You already have one. You had one the day you were born. You had one the first time I held you. You had one every day after. Nothing you achieve will increase your value. Nothing you fail at will decrease it. Graham lowered his head. The room remained silent. I don't think he was crying anymore. I think he was healing. There is a difference. The letter continued. "Peter, sweetheart, conflict is not the opposite of love." The sentence hit immediately, directly, perfectly. Some people spend decades avoiding arguments because they fear losing connection. Mom had seen that tendency in him before he was 10 years old. People who love each other will disappoint each other sometimes. They will disagree. They will misunderstand. They will make mistakes. Love survives those things. Silence often doesn't. Peter laughed softly through tears. "Asablet, a grateful one." Mom continued. "And Evelyn." My breath caught. The room disappeared again. There was only the letter. Only her voice. Only me. "You worry too much about everyone else." A tear rolled down my cheek immediately. "You always have. Even as a little girl. You carried responsibilities that never belonged to you. You tried to solve problems that adults should have handled themselves. You became everyone's helper, everyone's comfort, everyone's safe place." The page blurred. Because she was right. Painfully right. Beautifully right. And I realized something. Mothers often know us better than we know ourselves. Even after they are gone. Especially after they are gone. The letter continued. "I need you to understand something. Taking care of people is beautiful. but it is not your purpose. You were not born to carry everyone. You were born to live too. My vision blurred completely. I could barely continue reading. For years I thought grief was the heaviest thing I carried. Now I realized something else had been there too. Responsibility. Unnecessary responsibility. Inherited responsibility. The kind passed through families without anyone realizing it. Mom's words felt like permission. Permission I didn't know I needed. Then the letter shifted. The personal messages ended. The final section began. For all three of you. The room became quiet again. One day your father will be gone too. The sentence hurt. Even now. Even after the funeral. Even after everything. And when that day comes, I need you to remember something. Not about me. Not about him. About yourselves. I swallowed. Then continued. You will spend your lives believing the important moments are obvious. Graduations. Weddings. Birthdays. Achievements. You will be wrong. The room seemed to lean closer. Listening. The important moments are usually ordinary. A family dinner. A conversation in the kitchen. A drive home. A laugh you almost missed. A story told one more time. The moments that feel small while they're happening. Those are the moments you will miss most later. Peter closed his eyes. Graham stared at the floor. I continued reading. Pay attention to ordinary days. They become extraordinary memories. The sentence settled gently over the room. Like sunlight. Like wisdom. Like love. Then came the final paragraph. The last thing our mother ever wrote to us. If your father saved this letter, then he loved you exactly the way I knew he would. Completely. If he built a room to protect memories, forgive him. That is how he loves. And if the three of you are standing together while reading this, then something wonderful has happened. You found your way back to each other. Nobody spoke. Nobody could. Because somehow our mother had seen this day 27 years before it happened. The letter slipped from my hands onto my lap. The room remained silent. Not empty. Full. Full of voices. Full of memories. Full of understanding. Full of love. And for the first time, I began to suspect the last room still held one final secret. Not a hidden treasure. Not inheritance. Something much more valuable. A final message our father had been waiting his entire life to give us. The room remained silent for a long time. Not the uncomfortable kind of silence. Not the kind people rush to fill. This silence felt earned. Necessary. Like the pause after a prayer. Or the final note of a song that mattered. Outside, afternoon sunlight drifted slowly across the floor. Dust floated through golden beams of light. The entire room seemed suspended somewhere between memory and time. Eventually Peter stood. Without speaking, he walked toward the far wall. Toward the highest shelf. Toward a section none of us had examined yet. Something about his expression made me follow. So did Graham. The three of us stopped at the same moment. There, at the center of the shelf, sat a leather journal. Different from the others. Every journal in the room carried a year. 1989, 1990, 1991, and onward. This one carried no year. No label. No category. Only a single title embossed in fading gold letters. When they find a room, a chill moved through me. Peter noticed it too. Oh, that was all he said. Oh, because sometimes one word contains an entire conversation. Graham reached for the journal. No hesitation this time. No fear. No avoidance. Only curiosity. Only readiness. He opened the first page. Inside rested another envelope. Of course it did. At this point, none of us were surprised anymore. Dad had spent decades turning love into paper. The envelope contained a single sheet. One page. One final letter. The handwriting looked slightly shakier than the others. Later, near the end, written by a man who understood his time was running out. My dear children, if you are reading this, then the room has finally done its job. Peter laughed softly. The room had a job? I smiled. Apparently it did. The letter continued. I know all three of you believe this room exists because I was afraid of forgetting. That is only partly true. The room was never built to preserve memories. The room was built to preserve perspective. The sentence landed gently. Yet immediately I knew it mattered. Dad continued. Memory tells us what happened. Perspective reminds us what mattered. The room seemed smaller suddenly. Not physically. Emotionally. Focused. Every photograph. Every letter. Every recording, everything pointed toward the same lesson. What mattered? Not achievements, not mistakes, not possessions. People. Dad continued. I spent many years watching all three of you grow. I watched Graham become successful. I watched Peter become kind. I watched Evelyn become dependable. A pause. Then, and I watched each of you underestimate yourselves in different ways. None of us smiled this time. Because he was right. Painfully right. The letter continued. Graham thought his value came from achievement. Peter thought peace was more important than honesty. Evelyn thought love had to be earned through sacrifice. The room felt impossibly quiet. How had he seen all of it? How had he understood us? So completely? Then again, maybe that is what parents do. Maybe love pays attention. Dad continued. The room existed because I needed you to see yourselves through different eyes. Not your own. Mine. Peter lowered his head. Graham stared out the window. I felt tears gathering again. Because perhaps the greatest gift anyone can give us is perspective. A chance to see ourselves more accurately, more compassionately, more truthfully. Then came the final paragraph. The last message. The last lesson. The last inheritance. One day, this room will disappear. The journals will fade. The photographs will age. The tapes will stop working. The house itself may be gone. None of that matters. What matters is this. Love becomes visible through attention. The room disappeared. The shelves disappeared. Everything disappeared. Only that sentence remained. Love becomes visible through attention. Suddenly, every mystery solved itself. The photographs, the recordings, the journals, the letters, the preserved moments, the decades of effort. The room wasn't proof that Dad remembered us. The room was proof that he noticed us. The little moments, the ordinary moments, the invisible moments, the moments everyone else missed. Love becomes visible through attention. Peter wiped his eyes, slowly, thoughtfully, as though the sentence had found a permanent place inside him. Dad's final words followed. Pay attention to one another. That is all your mother and I ever hoped for. The letter ended there. No dramatic forward. No grand speech. No final twist. Just truth. Simple. Human. Complete. For several minutes, none of us moved. The room had given us everything it needed to give. Not answers. Understanding. And somehow understanding felt larger. Eventually Graham closed the journal. Carefully. Almost reverently. Then he looked around the room one final time. The photographs. The journals. The letters. The recordings. An entire lifetime transformed into evidence. Evidence that ordinary love matters. Evidence that ordinary days matter. Evidence that people matter. I know what we do now, he said quietly. Peter looked up. So do I. I smiled. Because for the first time in years, none of us disagreed. The answer felt obvious. Not because Dad told us what to do. Because he taught us how to think. Months later, the sold sign was gone. The sale remained canceled. The house remained standing. But it no longer belonged only to us. Part of it became a community memory center. Families donated photographs, recorded stories, saved voices, wrote letters for future generations. The room remained exactly as Dad left it. Not locked, never locked again. People visited it often, not to admire the collection, to remember what it represented. Attention, presence, love. One autumn evening, nearly a year after Dad's funeral, I stood alone inside the last room. The sun was setting. Golden light filled the shelves. The room looked peaceful, finished. On the center table sat two framed photographs. Mom, Dad, side by side, smiling, as though they knew something the rest of us were still learning. Maybe they did. I stood there for a long time, thinking, remembering, feeling grateful. Not because grief had disappeared. It hadn't. Grief never truly leaves. But it changes. It softens. It becomes part of love instead of evidence of loss. Outside, children laughed somewhere in the distance. A family walked across the lawn. Someone opened the front door. Life continued. Beautifully. Ordinarily. Exactly as it should. I looked one final time at the room that had changed everything. The room my brothers feared. The room my father protected. The room my mother somehow understood before any of us. And finally, I realized the last room had never been hidden at all. Its door had been closed. Its purpose had not. The purpose had always been waiting in plain sight, to bring us back to one another. And in the end, that turned out to be the greatest inheritance any parent could leave behind. Years later, people would ask how the Memory Center began. They usually expected a complicated answer. A business plan, a donation, a legal agreement, a vision. The truth was simpler. It began with a father who paid attention. That was all. A father who noticed when his daughter pretended she was fine. A father who noticed when his youngest son avoided difficult conversations. A father who noticed when his oldest son confused achievement with worth. Attention, the smallest form of love, the most powerful one. On the 5th anniversary of the center, more than 300 families attended a community gathering. Children ran through the garden. Grandparents shared stories. Teenagers rolled their eyes at old family photographs before secretly looking at them anyway. Life unfolded exactly as life always does. Messy, beautiful, ordinary. I stood on the porch watching people arrive. The old porch swing still hung in its usual place. Fresh paint covered the boards now. The roses Mom planted had grown larger than ever. For a moment, I could almost imagine her walking through the garden. Dad following a few steps behind, carrying tools, pretending not to help, helping anyway. Peter walked up beside me. His hair was grayer now. Mine too. Thinking about them, I smiled. When am I not? He nodded. No explanation needed. Some loves never become past tense. A few minutes later, Graham joined us. Still successful, still ambitious, but different, softer around the edges, less interested in proving, more interested in being present. The change had happened slowly, one ordinary choice at a time, just the way real change happens. He looked toward the front lawn where his grandchildren were playing. Then he smiled, a genuine smile, not the practiced one he used in photographs, the real one, the one Dad always loved. You know, he said quietly, I used to think the room changed my life. Peter glanced at him. It didn't. Graham shook his head. No. He looked toward the house, toward the open upstairs window, toward the room that no longer belonged to secrets. It showed me what had been true all along. None of us spoke, because we understood. The room hadn't created love. It revealed it. It hadn't repaired a family. It reminded us one existed. The afternoon passed quickly. Stories filled the house. Laughter drifted through open windows. Memories continued becoming new memories. Exactly as Dad would have hoped. As evening approached, I climbed the stairs alone. A habit I never quite lost. The last room waited at the end of the hallway. The door remained open. Always. I stepped inside. The shelves remained. The journals remained. The photographs remained. The recordings remained. But the room felt lighter now. Its work was finished. Or perhaps it had only changed. The room no longer preserved the past. It connected people to it. A small frame card sat on the center table. One of Dad's favorite lines. We eventually displayed copies throughout the building. Visitors loved it. Children rarely understood it. Adults almost always did. The card read, "The purpose of memory is not to live in the past. The purpose of memory is to carry love into the future." I touched the frame gently, then looked around one last time. At the shelves, at the photographs, at the evidence. Not evidence that people die. Everyone already knows that. Evidence that love remains. People forget that part. Outside, the sound of laughter drifted through the open window. Life calling, the future waiting. I smiled, then turned off the light, and walked out of the room. Not because the story was ending, because it had finally become part of someone else's. The door remained open behind me, exactly as it should, and somewhere deep inside, I felt the presence of both my parents. Not as ghosts, not as memories, as influence, as perspective, as love carried forward, which, in the end, was all they ever wanted, and all any of us truly leave behind.